Welcome to Books in Five, where we interview the authors of recently published books on relevant topics. We'll be asking the author 5 questions, and they will have 5 minutes to answer each one. I'm very excited about my guest today, as he has written a fantastic new book about entrepreneurialism in America. Erik, thank you so much for being our guest on Books in Five. Please tell us your full name, the title of your book, and where you are joining us from today.
Thanks so much for having me on. My name is Erik Baker. I teach history of science at Harvard University, and I'm the senior editor of The Drift magazine. My book is called Make Your Own Job, How the Entrepreneurial Work Ethic Exhausted America, and I'm joining today from Somerville, Massachusetts.
Amazing. Let's begin with our first question. Your book showcases the transformation of the entrepreneurial work ethic in America, as it now focuses on the individual's ability to show initiative and create opportunity. Why were you interested in exploring the topic, and how did you approach the research and the writing?
So I think that the most important drive for pursuing this topic for me is just how ubiquitous the culture that I analyze is in all of our lives. And in academia, as a young scholar, this is certainly the case for me just as much as it is for workers in so many industries right now. There's so much pressure that I felt and that so many people that I know have felt to respond to the sense of precarity and competitiveness in the labor markets that we're all embedded in by embracing the virtues of entrepreneurialism and by working tirelessly, not just to do a really good job at the work that we have in front of us, but to constantly be preparing for the next thing, to be staying one step ahead of the market and to be ginning up opportunity for ourselves in this perpetual cycle. And that perpetual process of creating more work for yourself to do, is I discovered, was so closely intertwined with the concept of entrepreneurship and about being entrepreneurial. And so it was especially this kind of virtue, what it meant to call someone entrepreneurial or to embody this almost sort of aura of being an entrepreneurial person as opposed to a different kind of worker or actor in the economic realm, that really caught my attention. And as I dug into the research, I discovered that there was a much longer history than I anticipated, stretching back ultimately to the early 20th century, when a lot of phrases and concepts and slogans that often feel hyper contemporary actually first appeared in the historical record. And so I ended up writing this book that narrates this history from the turn of the 20th century to the present moment, charting how this concept has evolved and some of the actors and the different kinds of contexts and conversations that have been responsible for spreading this dogma about the importance of creating, constantly being at work, creating new work, this paradoxical and, as I argue, exhausting set of expectations we place on ourselves.
Erik, we got about 2 more minutes. Can you tell us more about the research that went into this? Because, yeah, you really looked at the chronological history of the entrepreneur in America.
So as I got into the research, I really decided that there were kind of two main streams of work and writing that I really thought were crucial in bringing about this cultural shift, and those kind of formed the main sort of source bases that I was looking at. The first was popular psychology, or kind of self-help writing. This, I think a lot of us are familiar with these kinds of books where, that are often, really best-selling books that promise to unlock the secrets of success or happiness or whatnot. And there's a long history of that industry that's actually very closely entwined, I think, with the history of what I call the entrepreneurial work ethic. And then on the other hand, there's the body of work that I call management expertise. So more kind of targeted, less at a general readership and more at business practitioners themselves, whether in the form of business education or consulting or industry periodicals, things like that. And so the part of this, what I argue in the book is that this message about entrepreneurialism was not just something that people absorbed in the mass media, but also at work, and it was their concrete experience of being in particular workplaces, and their actual experience of the material realities of uh, trying to make a living under capitalism that helped make these ideas convincing.
Let's move on to our second question. The first few decades of the 20th century have been labeled the age of surplus. What was taking place in the economy during this period, and what were the concerns?
So I contrast the entrepreneurial work ethic with a dominant vision or framework for understanding the value of work and the conditions for success that I see as flourishing in the second half of the 19th century, that I call the industrious work ethic. And this is the, often maybe sort of a more familiar, more traditional kind of valence to the phrase work ethic. This is the sense that in order to succeed, you just need to kind of keep your head down, nose to the grindstone, and just do what you're told, and that ultimately by being diligent and applying yourself to the work that's in front of you, somehow, it's not necessarily in a kind of straightforward way, but you'll be rewarded in the fullness of time somehow. So how does this work ethic acquire this competitor, or this sort of new kind of cultural sediment that's layered on top of it, the entrepreneurial work ethic beginning in the 20th century? Well, one answer to that question that I develop in the book is to think about what's going on actually in the American economy at this time. That late 19th century period, where the industrious work ethic is flourishing, is one in which many Americans are joining the industrial working class for the first time. They're getting accustomed to the reality that in many cases they're probably going to be working for someone else for a wage for the rest of their lives. And this is a relatively novel experience for especially for white male Americans, people who often would have in an earlier generation been small agrarian property holders, or maybe small craftsmen or something like this. And so this message that, even though the work that you're doing may not be super pleasant, it may not be the kind of work that an older generation thought gave the sort of grounds for self-respect, that there's still sort of virtue in work for work's sake, and that you just need to apply yourself, and ultimately this performance of moral virtue will be rewarded. But in the first decades of the 20th century, there are a lot of people who start experiencing anxieties that are very familiar to us today, that especially through the advance of new technologies and technological change in the workplace, that their jobs are increasingly being done by machines, or that fewer people suffice to do the same jobs. And furthermore, these innovations are being so widely dispersed throughout the economy that this earlier cycle, where people displaced by mechanization from one kind of job can get work in a different industry, or even get work making those same machines, that starts to peter out too. And so instead, people find work in a really dizzying variety of qualitatively new kinds of jobs, especially service provision. And people first start to talk about the emergence of a service economy, or the service industry, for the first time at this stage. And so there's a widespread sense that whether you're really optimistic about the new potential for these more kinds of consumer-facing goods and services provision that's characteristic of the consumer economy of the 1920s, or if you're really anxious about the impending possibility of mass unemployment because of, or technological or structural unemployment, as people start talking about it at this time, there's a sense that the work that's here today will not be there tomorrow. So instead of accommodating workers to the permanence of this, their position as wage workers, instead the ideological task comes to be to accustom workers to the necessity of constantly looking for the next thing, of adjusting, of adapting, of really treating the process of job creation with a kind of reverence and gratitude. And so this is really the moment that, or the set of material conditions that I think lays the groundwork for the development of the entrepreneurial work ethic. And in the book, I give examples of self-help writers in sort of new religious movements, as well as new academic work, places like Harvard Business School, the company culture of new consumer goods manufacturing firms like Ford Motors that really sort of embody the origins of the this new entrepreneurial work ethic.
Erik, let's move on to our third question. With the Great Depression throwing millions out of a job, people turned to a variety of other opportunities to try to make ends meet. Walk us through the seduction of trying to make one's own way in the world, and how did those looking for work react?
So the Great Depression kind of fulfills these prophecies, or at least it seems to fulfill the kind of most apocalyptic predictions of the early 20th century about the consequences of the advent of an age of surplus, or the generalization of these technological innovations throughout the economy. All of a sudden, you actually do have stubborn, persistent, chronic, and quite high unemployment, especially in the core industrial sectors that formed the engine of the American economy for the preceding half century or more. And so this is really the perfect environment for the prophets of this new entrepreneurial work ethic to claim vindication and to recruit new people into their cause, because they can point in a concrete way to the necessity of trying to make your own job. A phrase that becomes increasingly common is the title of one popular self-help book published during the Depression, precisely because you're not going to get a job any other way under these circumstances. And so on the one hand, there are particular industries, and I place a lot of attention in this section of the book on the direct selling industry that capitalize on this environment. And so these are companies like the California Perfume Company, the manufacturer of Avon perfumes, that they're able to say that the kind of work that they have in their company is a more kind of they don't quite use the word entrepreneurial yet, but they say it's what we would now and what soon comes to be called entrepreneurial. It's a kind of form of small business ownership within the context of a larger company, and so the people who are marketing these products, they're rather than sort of depending on someone to give them a job in the circumstances of the Depression, the messaging that these companies pump out is that it's possible to take the initiative yourself, and anyone, regardless of the circumstances, who can use the powers of salesmanship or saleswomanship in the case of many of these Avon marketers, to create demand for their goods. It's up to you, the individual, to thrive even in this difficult situation. And that's a logic that's also makes its way increasingly into political rhetoric at this time. Opponents or skeptics of New Deal federal job creation programs often say that rather than the government trying to create jobs for people ought to be able, the unemployed ought to be able to create jobs for themselves through their own ingenuity or creativeness. And so examples proliferate of the different kind of odd jobs, or as one book calls it, unusual vocations that people can avail themselves of, to even in, again, very dire economic circumstances, you can still, go around selling cakes on a subscription basis, door to door, or you can start a house cleaning company of one. The idea of this starting a business of one to withstand the Depression becomes very popular in this moment. And so again, that we kind of see these forces of mass market self-help, of particular companies, and then of kind of a broader register of political discourse, all sort of circling around this same idea that there's an alternative to the more kind of collective or solidaristic approaches to the reality of mass unemployment during the Depression, and instead individual creativity and ingenuity can solve this problem.
Let's move on to question number 4. You write about the family businesses that truly thrived during the New Right movement. What was going on in the Sun Belt and Midwest that allowed these private firms and conservatism to fuse into a call for entrepreneurship?
So I guess continuing the story of the Great Depression, ultimately the economy does recover, and it's in large part because of the mobilization, federal mobilization for for arming the country for World War II and into the Cold War. But one interesting consequence of all of these changes was a major shift in the geography of economic production. Increasingly, the firms that really benefited from the defense bonanza of the 1940s and 1950s were places that were actually removed from the kind of traditional centers of manufacturing strength in the East Coast and the Midwest, the regions that start to be called the Rust Belt as they continue to deindustrialize. And instead, these new regions in the South and the West, even as early as the Roosevelt administration, developing these places economically is a major priority. And so at the same time that there are these federal initiatives going on, precisely because there are these concerns about the federal overreach and the government creating jobs for people, and there's this kind of counterbalancing discourse that instead emphasizes the need for entrepreneurship and individual initiative. Increasingly, there are these sort of business leaders in the business community in these areas of what comes to be known as the Sun Belt that sort of downplay the role of the federal government and instead kind of play up their own role as entrepreneurial leaders in sort of bringing about the transformation of this place. And increasingly, in the as the decades wear on, this sort of advocacy for regional economic development can join forces with a sort of cultural the cultural crusade of what comes to be known as the New Right, which condemns the liberal cultural values associated with the East Coast business establishment. And so for these business leaders in the South and West of the U.S., for them, their claims about their role as entrepreneurial business leaders in developing these often rural or small town regions, they fold this into a broader narrative about protecting and revitalizing the values that are associated with these kinds of places, in contrast to the cities of the decadent East Coast. And so there's this potent fusion of economic and cultural conservatism that defines the New Right movement, and it's being promulgated not just by political activists or think tank people, but often by business leaders, and not just in their role as people financing various campaigns or think tanks. Again, that's a common way the story has been told, but it's actually going on in their companies. And so I take some time looking at these different firms: Koch Industries, Walmart, McDonald's, and Amway, continuing the story of direct selling from the Depression era, and show that this story about the role of entrepreneurship as simultaneously leading to an economic resurgence of these previously undeveloped or underdeveloped areas, and promoting this kind of distinctively sort of small town Americana kind of family values, traditionalist conservatism. That's going on in the workplace. It's being messaged to employees, and increasingly these executives see the structure of their firm as an ideological tool for disseminating this message. So like in Amway, everyone, again, employment is actually structured. They call their workers their distributors, They insist that they actually are entrepreneurs themselves. So there are these efforts that are made, and it's something similar at Koch Industries. Each manager is actually an entrepreneurial owner of their own process. So the structure of the firm complements the explicit ideological messaging or storytelling about entrepreneurship and its associated cultural values.
Erik, let's conclude with our final question. In the 21st century, the American economy hasn't performed well. And again, the call is for more workers to try to become their own boss. How are people dealing with an increasingly unequal society after the great financial crisis?
Yeah, so this is a question that I've continued to ask myself even after this book has been published. And I wrote most of this book in the last years of the Biden administration, when it seemed that overall the economy and the labor market had been recovering a bit after the COVID pandemic. But now, this year there's been a lot of anxiety again about the job market, especially for young people coming out of school and confronting a labor market that seems both increasingly transformed by the adoption of generative AI, as well as the economic consequences of the Trump administration's policies so far. And so, all of a sudden now it's starting to look a lot more familiar to the story of the American economy in the 21st century, especially after the crisis of the Great Recession of 2007, 2008. But even early on we often forget that the 21st century really began with a recession following the burst of the dot-com bubble and the fallout of the 9/11 attacks on New York's economy. And so in any event, the point is that I think that it's now clearer than ever that if you stand back and you take a look at the economic picture in the 21st century, it's one of pervasive anxiety about getting a job, of earning a living. It's an environment that people associate with stagnation, with kind of one trend after another, whether it's the dot-com bubble, moving into the housing bubble, moving into the kind of first round of the sort of tech startup economy, and now we have another round with we've it seems like the pace is accelerating. So we've seen, crypto and the metaverse and AI now, and there's this sense of constantly trying to race ahead and find the next thing that's going to stabilize things, that's going to give people a secure grasp on a livelihood. And it's precisely this cycle of, trying to look for the next thing that is what I see as really at the heart of the appeal of the entrepreneurial work ethic, going back to this moment in the early 20th century, where again it kind of felt like the economy was changing and people weren't entirely sure what was going to be next. So at each stage of the way, whether this is the sort of proliferation of Uber for X apps and their associated gig work, or whether this is the kind of immense explosion in popularity of positive psychology and its kind of associated messaging about the importance of being proactive and questioning sort of defeatist thought patterns and focusing attention on what's in one's individual control. There again is as I see it, a kind of synergy between what's often going on in people's material economic lives and what's going on in people's ideological and cultural lives that combines to help reinforce this message that in this context where a lot of people are very uncertain, they have a hard time imagining what their working life is going to look like in just a few years, much less 10 or 20, that this kind of constant process of reinvention of, rather than relying on someone else to provide you a job, of instead cultivating the individual attributes and the kind of resources necessary to not just make your own job today, but to keep making your own job for the rest of your life. That's increasingly the message that people absorb. And we also see as the subtitle of my book suggests, I think the exhaustion that produces. And to bring us back to the beginning, it's that sort of sense that there's something unsustainably draining about our culture of work today that originally drove me to write this book.
Erik, that has been our 5 questions. You've answered them in 5 minutes. Let's move on to our bonus questions. Erik, tell us more about your career path to becoming a historian. What motivated you to join that profession? Yeah.
Yeah, have spent a lot of time working on this book, thinking about my own working life, and I mean, I think that I was originally interested, actually, when I was in undergrad, in pursuing a career in the sciences. I wanted to tackle the problem of climate change, and it was really discovering the historical work that's been done on this issue that sort of it woke me up to the reality that a lot of the key science actually had already been done, and that really climate change, as I began to understand it, in order to understand the factors that were preventing us from taking action, we needed to understand all these issues about the history of economics and political ideology and capitalism, the relationship between business and the government. And so I decided that that's actually what I really wanted to understand. And so it was that intellectual motivation more than any kind of strategic calculations, shall we say, about my career outlook that ultimately led me into historical study.
Obviously, the book is a major achievement, but why don't you tell us a little bit more about another accomplishment you are proud of?
Well, related to the theme of the book, I spent a lot of time in grad school helping to get our graduate student union here at Harvard, the Harvard Graduate Student Union, UAW, off the ground, and we won our union election and went on strike and negotiated our first contract, all while I was in grad school and helping to lead our organizing. And so, to me, I always like to bring this up in connection with the book, because this is kind of my attempt to give people an answer to the alternative. This is the way these issues of precarity and uncertainty that we all confront at work. They're not going away. They're not illusions. They're not just in your head, but there's an alternative to the make your own job gospel, I think, which is collective action. And so I'm very proud of the contributions I've been able to make to making that a little more concrete in the academic case, at least.
Erik, what are you working on next? Do you have a project in mind?
Yeah, so this book, as I mentioned, is a very long, expansive history covering the entire course of the 20th and 21st centuries. For my new project, I thought it would be fun to instead take a really close look at a particular pivotal moment of history. For the last few years, I've become especially preoccupied with the period in the immediate aftermath of World War II. I've done a lot of writing about the development and early deployment of atomic weapons and the formation of the national security state. And this is also a moment that's very crucial in American labor history, when the contours of the post-war economy are really they're up for negotiation, and workers and capitalists have a chance to kind of contest over what that's going to look like. And so I'm working right now on a project that's going to kind of tell the story of those first few crucial years in the aftermath of the war, and showing the kind of possibilities that people initially imagined in the immediate aftermath of the war for societal transformation, and how those possibilities, as I see it, were swiftly and tragically foreclosed by the advent of the Cold War.
Erik, thank you so much for joining us on Books in 5. Again, the title of the book is Make Your Own Job. I will put a link to the book in the show notes if you're not able to buy it. Definitely check it out from your local library. Erik, where can people find you? You're active on social media, right?
Yes, on Twitter and Blue Sky. I'm at Erik M. Baker. You can go to my website, erikmbaker.com. And again, our magazine is thedriftmag.com.
Erik, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much.
The host of Books in 5 is Bhavan Sudan. Books in 5 is produced in collaboration with Podfather Creative in Vancouver, Canada.